talk about people pleasing. Can I tell you a story, but only if I may, about a young woman's life and how she wished it could change? In everything she did, she asked inside her head, how is what I'm about to do going to affect others instead? She lived for thank yous, but she barely got any. Not much appreciation either. Acquaintances, she had plenty. She moved only when she was told, got depressed when people were mad, and if she didn't do what they said, which made her feel bad. But it was supposedly done in love, supposed to minimize mistakes. But it only made her resentful, as her hate grew great. As she grew more angrier, mad at herself more than she wanted, freedom only in her mind, her true self never flaunted. Her wisdom so deep for others, her knowledge so well and pure. For herself she didn't have any, she had stopped keeping score. She had forgotten what made her happy, what actions brought her joy. She lived her life just like a puppet or as somebody else's toy. She aimed to please, attention to details amazing, her own dreams obsolete, shriveled up like raisins. To watch so many people around her near and far, living the lives they choose, not using their house like a bar, not waiting for someone's attention, not waiting to be told what's next, not feeling sad and lonely, but only there living their best. Not crying in their sleep, not angry at their reflection, not desperate for approval, turning away genuine affection. Her life was not her own, but stories stayed in her brain. About people who were free, her tears flowed like rain. Life isn't easy for the people pleaser, the one that's got advice for you. You see, she has no advice for herself and she doesn't know what to do. But just sit around and mope, everybody asking, why are you drunk? When will you bring the sunshine back? When will you be out of your funk? It's hard to put a number on it, to put a timer on her feelings, on her internal struggles, all her scars without healings. But she will be back. The sun will shine again. After she washes off her tears, waiting for another day to begin. Because no, she's not happy, and life isn't always kind. Even though she always is, giving everyone else her time. Letting them dictate her actions. Bottling it all within, an adult that can't grow up, she feels like she can't win. A blank paper, her own outlet, people that could never be met, opportunities to be different, and not just the teacher's pet. Her life was fiction, and that was a fact, because the one thing she couldn't do was hide being sad. She was a daydreamer with hopes, and hopes led to expectations. Expectations led to disappointments, a life seemingly wasted. Never making her own decisions, pretending is all she can do, not really knowing what she wanted. No wonder her favorite color was blue. But one day she might be happy when she stops living for a pat in the back. But right now she's paralyzed in fear, and no one can seem to see that. Hello, I'm Tiffany, aka TA Suyt, that's Suyt with a Y and not an I. In today's episode, we're going to talk about people pleasing. What I just read from you is a poem that I written for my third book called The People Pleaser. That was the name of the poem. The poem is called The People Pleaser. The book is called Reaching, a book of poetry, letters, and quotes. And it was loosely based on myself and how I felt like my entire life I was indeed a people pleaser. And for those who don't know what that is, it's basically a trauma response. A lot of people don't even realize that they are people pleasing, and they don't realize that it can become a huge problem / burden in their lives. If you are the person who people are constantly relying on, the dependable one, who doesn't say no when people ask you to do something, who is afraid of making people upset or mad, and constantly wants to do for others in hopes of keeping them around, keeping them happy, keeping them satisfied, but at your own expense, you just might be a people pleaser. And it used to seem like a good thing. At least I thought it was, until I realized that I had this problem for many years of doing for other people I care about more than myself, going out of the way to make sure that they were taken care of, that they were satisfied, and again, at the expense of my own health or well being. And I struggled with this for many, many years. I still at times struggle with it, but I've learned to get better at this, again, trauma response, which has now led to me doing much better after realizing that it is a trauma response, that it is a problem, and that there is something that I can do to get better at it. For context purposes, I am the youngest of 9 children, and I love my parents dearly. I love my brothers and sisters dearly, but there is times where I do feel like, because I'm the youngest, the 8 siblings above me had the opportunity to do things that I didn't quite get the chance to do, or my parents wouldn't allow me to do, because they've already seen it happen 8 times before, and by the time it got to me, it's, look, you got to do better, okay? We're not going to keep seeing this happen again. And it's not to say my brothers and sisters were terrible people or bad or anything like that, because they're not. It's just my parents they made sure that I was kind of sheltered to make sure that I was okay, basically. And so I didn't get to experience as much as everybody else did. And that, I realized, wasn't really such a bad thing. When you look out in the world these days, there's so many children who I grew up with and around at school, classmates and things like that, who were, let's just be honest, they were unraised children who were doing a lot of bad things. And I could have easily fell by the wayside and went along with the group if I wasn't taught not to, and to be a leader and not a follower by the parents who, again, shelter me from those students and their behavior and other people, and made sure that I was on the straight and narrow path. So I do thank them for that. The problem is, when I got older, I wanted to do it for everybody. I wanted to do it for the jobs that I worked at. I wanted to go above and beyond on the job for my bosses and things like that. I wanted to go above and beyond for friendships or family members, above and beyond, and again, at my own expense. And when you get to that point, that's when you realize it's becoming a problem. When you realize you're not the one who's benefiting and you're not happy or feeling well all the time, but you're still doing it because you want to please the other person and make sure they're not angry or sad or not felt like they're not taken care of. And that's when I had to really realize that this is a problem and that it needs to be dealt with. And so that poem I've written years ago, and that was actually back when I was dealing with my depression and my anxiety. So it was a different version of me. It was a different Tiffany. And I can, every time I read things from, a couple of years back, and it wasn't that long ago that I was dealing with my depression. I can honestly say it was probably a good 3 years ago, probably 4, when I was really in the throes of my depression. And like I said, the people pleasing aspect was one of the things I had to deal with. It's part of the anxiety and things that I had to deal with. And I can honestly say that I'm in a much, much better place than I was then, which is the reason why I can start a podcast and YouTube channels and all these different outlets now, and explain to others about how you too should see the signs and read the signs of, if you feel like you are a people pleaser and that you do not have to stay in that place, in that predicament of feeling like you have to benefit everybody else and others don't necessarily have to benefit you. You also need to learn that you have to take care of yourself. And again, you can read that poem in my 3rd book, Reaching, a book of poetry, letters, and quotes. If you look in the description box, you'll be able to see my website, and you can be able to buy those books whenever you're ready. So now I want to get into some quotes as well. And this is from my 5th book, a very tiny book of very big quotes I just released not too long ago. And this first quote is this: being generous and being a people pleaser are two different things. One knows limits and boundaries while the other one does not. And this is very, very, very true. Being a people pleaser myself, I would like to say I was a former people pleaser, but there's times where I do see myself slipping up and not saying no, or telling people how tired I am, or, again, afraid of, the reaction I can get from people who I disappoint because I don't want them to feel disappointed. So there's times where I do struggle with this. However, I always felt like, I thought people pleasing was just being generous. If you're a generous person, people will notice you're a generous person because of your act of kindness, and then they will respect that, and in return respect you. However, that's not always the truth. Some people will notice that you are a people pleaser or overly generous with your time, your money, your energy, your talents, your skills, or what have you, and they can and will take advantage of that. Let's just keep it real. That's the reality of the world. Not everybody are saints, are sweet, are kind. Some people are just, let's just be real, they're assholes, okay? They got their own issues. They have their issues, and they got their own trauma responses, and they have their own reasons for why they do what they do. However, like I said, being a people pleaser myself, or a former people pleaser myself, I noticed that I had to start putting up some boundaries around certain people, or just in myself. Just even if I didn't have to put up huge boundaries around the people, it was me who needed to set these boundaries within myself to know when to say no, to know when to say, okay, I need to take a step back. I don't always need to be doing these certain things to please other people, to make them happy and things like that. But I should also be doing these things for myself. And if I need to take a step back and I need to do things for me, that it's completely okay. Saying no is not a bad thing. Taking time out for yourself is not a bad thing. It's not selfish. And realizing that I'm not a selfish person just because I'm doing these things. And so that's what I'm learning. And that quote always kind of reminds me, and anybody else who is going through this, that people pleasing is a mental disorder. Let's keep it real. I'm a psych major. It is real. It's very real. And sometimes we don't know our limits and our boundaries, and we need to start setting limits and boundaries when we realize that we are continuing on a cycle of pattern of constantly being overly generous and overly kind and overly giving, because it's possible to have too much of a good thing. And that's what people pleasing basically is, going above and beyond when you don't necessarily need to all the time. And we have to learn that. And quote number 2 is this: for years, I had no clue that my want/need to constantly put others' needs ahead of my own was directly linked to my self-esteem. I could only find value in myself if others found value in me first. It wasn't until I started working on my inner healing that I started to give myself all the love and appreciation I was searching for. I've learned to stop waiting on something that I've always had within me: self-love. This is probably the biggest part of people pleasing that people who are people pleasers need to learn. Yes, we are ultimately servants. We're here, we're sitting on this earth for a reason. Nobody's life is in vain. We're not just here just to do whatever. Like, it's for a specific reason. There's a specific reason everybody was sent on this earth, and we're all ultimately going to do whatever it is that we were sent here to do. But just because we are sent here to help others and be servants and do things of the sort does not mean that we have to give our lives to other people. We don't have to get to the point where our self-esteem and how we see ourselves and how we appreciate ourselves or look in the mirror at ourselves is based off of how others view us. We have to get to the point where we learn that it's not about other people's opinions about us. It doesn't matter what their opinion about us ultimately is. I don't care if it's a good opinion. I don't care if it's a bad opinion. Ultimately, it's just their opinion. So we're not here to just serve them to the point where they can have a direct effect on our self-esteem. We don't base our appreciation of ourselves based on how others think about us. And that gets into, the trauma response. The psychology of being a people pleaser, of not wanting to discipline others, the fear of them leaving you or losing them or being alone. We got to get to the point where we realize that ultimately we came in to this earth alone. We were born as a single person. We came in alone and we're going to leave this earth alone. So we got to get to the point where other people's opinions in the moment isn't directly having an effect on our self-esteem. We have to love ourselves enough to know that we have limits and boundaries and know when our limits and boundaries are, so we can say no or yes when needed and not feel overwhelmed or tired or exhausted because we overly gave when we didn't need to. We shouldn't live in a fear of we're going to lose them. We're going to lose them. If we don't say yes, if we don't do this, if we don't do that, we're going to lose them. Don't get to that point. Do not get to the point where you think that you're going to lose people if you don't say yes, if you don't agree to what they're saying, if you don't constantly be their ATM, their chauffeur, their diary, their this, that, and the third. It's okay to say no, and it's okay to put yourself first and not feel like it's being selfish, because that's not what it is. Okay? Self-love comes first. We got to get our self-esteem up. We got to start appreciating ourselves. We got to look in the mirror and smile when we see that reflection. It's not about the other person. It's not about pleasing them, but this is the life we're living in. The life is not based off of other people and their opinions and pleasing them and making sure they're happy all the time if it's at the expense of ourselves and our own happiness. It's about ourselves, okay? And it's not to the point where it's just always about ourselves and we don't have to do for other people and it's always me, because then we're getting to another toxic trait or toxic area where there's people who is just so selfish, who constantly put themselves first and they don't do for others, and that also exists. But we're not talking about those people. That's a whole other topic. We can get on that subject and have a whole video on that as well. But for right now, we're talking about people pleasing, the ones who knows that there's an imbalance in their relationships, the ones who overly give, who don't say no, who are constantly doing so much. They feel exhausted mentally and physically because they're constantly trying to please others just to keep the other people around, to make sure they never leave, to do for other people. And again, what are these people doing for you? Are they also doing this for you? Is it equal give and take? Is it reciprocal? If it's not, then you gotta understand that this people pleasing may be more serious than you think. And it was for me, and I had to get to the point where I had to learn to be more selfish, to be more selfless, and take care of me. And realize that I also am a human being. I gotta come first. My happiness, my well-being, my mental, my physical, that is very important. And I had to start learning to take care of myself. So now I'm gonna get to the last quote. Quote number 3. And it goes like this. Remember that you're living for yourself and not to please people. Not everyone is going to understand your choices, but if your choices light up your spirits and brings you joy, then I think that's truly all that matters. And this gets to the point where once you realize that maybe you are a people pleaser and maybe you were overly giving yourself up to people, to your job, to your family, to friends, to your mate, in relationships. Maybe you were overly giving. And that's okay. We're human. We're not perfect. We get to these points where we have to kind of realize, take a step back, look at the big picture for what it is and see where are we in our lives? What can we improve on? What can we change? And so when you realize that, yeah, maybe I was a people pleaser. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. You got to get to the point where eventually you got to realize you're living your life for yourself. And yes, there's going to be some naysayers around you. And there's going to be maybe some people around you who wants to control you and control how you think and what you do. And they're not going to be happy with all your choices. But if the choice makes you happy, then it's okay. Of course, it can't be a choice that's going to be hurting someone else or yourself in the process. But if this is a choice that you know you should be doing and it lights up your spirits and it makes you happy, again, something that's not negative, but that's just really helping you out and making you happy, regardless of the naysayers or the people who want to control you and your thoughts. It makes you happy, lights up your spirits, it brings you joy. Now you're getting to the point where you're realizing that it's not about pleasing others, but it's also about pleasing yourself. And that you come first. And maybe there's a hobby you have, or a dream, or a goal that you're working towards. And maybe not everybody around you is going to understand it. And maybe they have some things to say. Maybe they have some really negative things to say. And they're going to try to poop on your party and be some Debbie Downers. And they live in the world of reality. And realistically, maybe you're not going to make it and this, that, and the third. You don't have to listen to the naysayers. Make the adjustments that you need to create some distance between you and the naysayers, so that you are constantly bringing more joy and fulfillment into your life. It's not about pleasing them. Ultimately, it's about making yourself happy, bringing some happiness and joy and love into your own life, so that when you give it to other people, it's not going to feel imbalanced or unfair or anything like that. It's not going to be toxic. It's going to be good, because you got to first learn to love yourself, bring those joy, happiness, and kindness to yourself, and then you'll be able to give it to other people back. It starts with you. Please you first, and then you'll be able to help/please others. But not to the point where you're overly giving. Not to the point where it's a problem. Not to the point where you feel like you're overly generous and you're exhausted and tired. But yes, do for others. That's what we're all ultimately sent on this earth to do. But not to the point, again, where it's overly generous. Don't overdo it. Okay? Because we sometimes can. And if you realize that you are in this place, like I once was and still kind of am, just realize that, yeah, you're human. You make mistakes. Sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we got some certain issues we got to deal with and we got to cope with and improve on. And this is one of them. It's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. And it's not going to make you a bad person to say no and to put more of that focus and energy onto yourself, which is ultimately what you need to do. All right? All right. I'm Tiffany, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Now, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, or follow.